Hey, tonight we slip into the velvet shadows of Elizabeth's court. The Virgin Queen in public, but in private. You sit in the dark, the air thick with candle wax and the distant rustle of tapestries. Just behind your shoulder, a lute plays something, soft and haunting. Somewhere, heels click on stone, and above it all, like a ghost clinging to the rafters, hangs one lingering question. Did Queen Elizabeth I really die a virgin, or was that the greatest lie in history? This isn't some prim fairy tale. You're stepping into a court of silken masks and sharpened tongues, where image is everything and secrets are currency. The year is 1603. The Queen is dying, and for more than 4 decades she's ruled alone. Husband, no children, no king beside her. Just the legend of chastity, cloaked in pearls. But you probably won't survive this if you think Tudor politics was just about who wore the fanciest collar. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and post where you're listening from, and what time it is right now in your corner of the world. Now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across the damp stones of a shadowy courtyard, December's breath icing your cheeks as the Queen's heralds announce her slipping pulse behind the oak doors. In her final hours, Elizabeth says nothing. She simply stares, wide-eyed, refusing even to lie down, propped upright on a mountain of pillows. She hasn't named a successor, she hasn't written a will, and most tellingly, she hasn't confessed. People are whispering, even now. Has she gone mad? Did guilt catch up to her? Or is she taking the greatest Tudor secret to the grave? It would have been safer for everyone if Elizabeth had simply married, and not just because Tudor England was practically allergic to female rulers. This was a time when a woman without a husband was considered unfinished, like a book without an ending or a pie without its crust. And a queen, especially one ruling alone, was expected to behave with the modesty of a nun and the fertility of a milkmaid. Easy, right? But Elizabeth never married, never even got close. At least, officially. Of course, that didn't stop her from surrounding herself with handsome men, dripping with perfume and ambition. She liked charm, she liked danger, and most of all, she liked control. And that's what tonight is really about. Control. Because as much as history remembers her as the Virgin Queen, there's no official definition for what exactly that meant in Elizabethan terms. Did it mean abstinence, or just no pregnancy? Was she a lifelong celibate, or simply a world-class secret keeper? You follow her back in time to her girlhood. It's not a cozy start. She's just 2 when her mother, Anne Boleyn, is executed by her father. Yeah, Henry VIII doesn't exactly win Dad of the Year. Elizabeth's title is stripped, her royal crib tossed in the attic. By 10, she's already learned to keep her mouth shut and her hands folded. But things get creepier when her father dies and her stepmother, Catherine Parr, remarries a charming but unsettling man, Thomas Seymour. You don't like the way he looks at Elizabeth. Historians still argue whether anything happened behind those doors, but servants reported him creeping into her bedchamber in the mornings, tickling her inappropriately and cutting up her dresses. Catherine once walked in on him holding Elizabeth in his lap. Awkward doesn't begin to cover it. It ends with Elizabeth being sent away. Not long after, Catherine dies in childbirth, and Seymour is arrested for treason and possibly for having intentions far too inappropriate for the king's daughter. He's executed in 15 for 9, so you wonder, what did that do to Elizabeth? The men she trusted most either betrayed her or died horribly. No wonder she got so good at keeping people at arm's length and keeping secrets. At 14, she's questioned for her connection to Seymour. The interrogators press her hard. Was there any familiarity between you? Her answers are as tight-lipped as an unopened codpiece. Nothing inappropriate. He never behaved strangely, but her evasiveness worries the council. She's watched. She's locked away for weeks. You're pacing the halls of Hatfield House now, where teenage Elizabeth waits to learn if she be executed for treason. Every knock at the door is a death sentence that might not come. You imagine her curled up at night, planning her words, crafting her image. By the time she becomes queen, years later, she already knows the stakes. The wrong rumor can kill you. The wrong truth, even more so. So she constructs a legend. The Virgin Queen, a monarch married to her people, a woman without physical needs, a body without a blemish. And yet, she flirts openly. She names favorites. Her sweet boys, as she calls them. She allows them liberties no other queen would dare permit. They touch her hands. They whisper in her ear. Some even boast they've seen her in her NIGHTGOWN. You start to see the contradiction. Publicly, she's chaste. Privately, who knows? Still, it's genius. Her virginity becomes more than a personal choice, it's her political brand. In portraits, she's swathed in moonlight, armored in pearls, eyes cold as frost. Virginal. Purity becomes power, and the public eats it up. Pamphlets, poems, sermons, even coins depict her as untouched by man. But was she? Let's be honest. Tudor records are about as subtle as a dagger to the ribs. What survives is filtered through spies, sycophants, and scribes hoping not to get beheaded. But the sheer effort Elizabeth puts into maintaining this image, down to forbidding anyone to mention her age, or call her old, suggests she's hiding something. Maybe not sex. Maybe something deeper. Because in a world where women were owned, used, and discarded, Elizabeth carved out a third option. Myth. And tonight, you're going to trace the myths back to their first whisper, through the darkened hallways of court, past the velvet curtains and the glinting daggers, to the locked doors and the men who waited behind them, one step at a time. You find yourself in the flickering twilight of a cold stone corridor, the wind pushing faintly through the leaded glass windows. The shadows stretch long and uneasy, like secrets that haven't yet learned to whisper. Before Elizabeth became queen, before she even dared to dream of the throne, she was a teenager in captivity, caged in her own birthright. They called her the bastard child, and even that was polite. After an Ublin's execution, Elizabeth was declared illegitimate. Her royal title was revoked, her place in court reduced to that of a royal inconvenience. She learned early that her survival depended on silence, patience, and reading a room. Faster than anyone else. She had to become a mirror. Now you walk alongside her at 13, then 15, then 17, watching her thread the needle of survival under the reign of her half-sister. Mary, I and you feel it. This strange tension between youth and danger, between adolescence and power. It's not sweet, it's razor-edged. Let's talk about that razor. Because at the age of 20, Elizabeth is arrested. You don't get much more high stakes than this. It's 1554, and there's been a rebellion, Thomas Wyatt the Younger, trying to prevent Queen Mary from marrying the Catholic Philip of Spain. Elizabeth's name surfaces among the conspirators. Did she know about the plot? Did she encourage it? Historians still argue whether Elizabeth was an active conspirator or just a very convenient scapegoat. Either way, it was enough to send her to the Tower of London. Imagine it. You're marched through Traitor's Gate, the same river portal used for Anne Boleyn 2 decades before. You're soaking wet, half frozen, and every step on the stone makes you flinch, because any one of them could be your last. Elizabeth was certain she'd be executed. She later claimed she scratched a Latin phrase into her prison window. Much suspected by me, nothing proved can be. Bit dramatic, sure, but you try keeping it low-key when your family tree is made entirely of murder. She survived, barely, kept in house arrest for nearly a year, moved from one drafty estate to another, surrounded by watchful eyes and hungry gossip, and it's during this strange, suspended moment of her life that something curious happens. Thomas, Parry, Kat, Ashley, her closest attendants, they start noticing how she behaves behind closed doors. She reads constantly, yes, but not just scripture and Cicero. She reads poetry, racy, coded, Renaissance poetry. She flirts with her guards. One nobleman writes, not entirely approvingly, that Elizabeth is too free with her laughter. Another reports that she is as cunning with her glances as a Venetian courtesan. That's a bold claim for a woman in captivity. But there's someone else watching. Robert Dudley. He isn't the grand figure yet. Not yet the lord of the Queen's heart. He's just the son of the traitoress Duke of Northumberland. He's also been imprisoned for his father's crimes. And wouldn't you know it, he's kept at the very same estate where Elizabeth is being guarded. Small world, smaller cells. It's not clear when they first speak, but one of the surviving letters from Dudley later refers to the comfort of that most strange and sorrowful time. Is it code? Is it nostalgia? Is it a love letter trying not to look like one? Here's the thing, Elizabeth's early life wasn't just tragic, it was engineered to shape a queen who would never trust love. The Seymour scandal, the Tower imprisonment, her sister's paranoia of it wove a lesson into her spine. Affection gets you killed. So you're starting to see why Elizabeth's body became such a battlefield. It wasn't just if she was a virgin, it was how long she could afford to remain one. When Mary dies in 1558, Elizabeth ascends to the throne. 25 years old, cunning, cautious, and entirely alone. She walks into Westminster Abbey as the new monarch in gold-stitched robes and a stare that says, "You have no idea what I've survived." The Archbishop asks if she will promise to uphold the laws of England. She smiles, tilts her head, and says, "I will act as my conscience leads me." A sly burn for the ages. But here's the real plot twist. The new queen brings Dudley back, not just back into court, but into her inner circle. She gives him rooms close to hers, private access, a key to the royal gardens. And soon, well, soon, everyone starts talking. By 1559, Dudley is the only man seen escorting Elizabeth at night. He's found in her privy chamber at all hours. The Spanish ambassador writes home, stunned, describing Elizabeth's intolerable fondness for Dudley and the great presumption of the court that they lie together. Now remember, this is a court where women weren't even allowed to walk down the same corridor as the Queen unless summoned. The fact that Dudley could daily raise his one immovable eyebrow. Still, there's no proof, no journal entry, no bedsheets, no confession, just endless, sticky rumor. And yet, when Dudley's wife, Amy Robsart, is found dead at the bottom of a staircase in 1560, everything tilts. Elizabeth doesn't banish Dudley. She doesn't reprimand him. She doesn't even speak his wife's name. Instead, she keeps him close. People start asking, was it a lover's pact gone wrong? Was Amy pushed? Historians still argue whether Amy's death was an accident, a suicide, or something altogether darker. But one thing becomes crystal clear. If Elizabeth had any plans to marry Dudley, they died that day. She understood the stakes. Now, as a woman alone, she could be mythologized. As a woman married, she could be blamed, so she made a decision. She would marry no man. And as you return to the candlelit palace, you feel the first threads of legend begin to bind. A woman who rules alone, who gives her heart only in riddles, who wears her chastity like armor, and uses desire like a weapon. But if you think that means she lived, without passion, without intimacy, even well, you've clearly never been to the Queen's bedchamber after dark, and that's where we're going next. You slip quietly down the velvet-lined corridor, the flickering torchlight catching on a polished suit of armor, a knight frozen mid-step, like even he dared not intrude upon what lies beyond. At the far end, the Queen's private apartments wait, and if you listen closely, there's the faintest echo of laughter, low, warm, and unmistakably hers. This is not the grand stage of Elizabethan politics, not the throne room or the Privy Council chamber. This is the place where masks are loosened, slippers are kicked off, and sometimes just maybe rules are broken. Robert Dudley is already here. He has always been here, in one way or another. His name was never far from her lips. Even when she scolded him in public, she never really pushed him away. He was her Robin, as she called him, a pet name, a possessive one. Tonight, you're watching them in their prime, the 1560s, when Dudley is at his most golden, and Elizabeth, though battered by political storm, still shines like a woman untouched by time. They dance together, they fence together, they vanish into private walks for hours. When he's absent, she sulks. When he's present, she glows. And the court, oh, it notices. Foreign ambassadors write frantic letters home. One claims Elizabeth caresses him more openly than is proper. Another reports, with scandalized precision, that Dudley puts his hand upon her body in public view. That's a polite way to say he was groping the monarch and getting away with it. But here's the odd thing. Dudley wasn't the most powerful nobleman. He wasn't the richest or the most politically useful. He was ambitious. Yes, but the kind of ambition that burned like a torch dropped in dry straw. Too visible, too dangerous. Marrying him would have united no kingdoms, settled no debts, secured no heirs. So why him? That's the question you keep circling like a falcon above a trembling rabbit. The answer might be this: Dudley knew her before. She was queen, before the image calcified. He saw the imprisoned teenager, the frightened girl, the survivor. That kind of knowledge creates intimacy, and intimacy creates leverage. But did they really have a physical relationship? Historians still argue whether their love was ever consummated. Some say yes, pointing to the sheer amount of time they spent alone and the obvious heat between them. Others believe Elizabeth never would have risked the pregnancy scandal, and that Dudley, for all his swagger, remained locked outside the fortress of her final refusal. Still, it's hard to ignore the evidence that something unspoken passed between them, something heavy, intimate, and threaded with longing. You pass by her bedchamber now. The air here smells different, like lavender water and old wood. The walls are hung with tapestries stitched with allegory, a phoenix rising, a crescent moon reflecting the sun, all symbols she favored, all symbols that suggest duality, that she was never just one thing. Her bed is vast, canopied, tall enough that a stool is required to climb in. Beside it sits a little writing table, where she scrawled notes in Italian, Latin, and Greek, sometimes even poetry. One poem, unsigned but in her handwriting, speaks of a fire that cannot be touched, but warms the soul to ruin. So was it Dudley. Here's a quirky historical tidbit. The Queen's ladies were known to keep records gossipy, coded logs about who entered her chamber and when. Most have vanished, but one scrap survives from 1562, when Elizabeth fell gravely ill with smallpox. Dudley was the only man permitted into her private apartments during her fevered days. He ordered doctors, washed linens, even slept on a pallet outside her door. That's not just loyalty, that's intimacy. And yet, when she recovered, she didn't reward him with a crown. Quite the opposite, she started floating marriage alliances with other men again. French dukes, Austrian archdukes. Even her cousin, the insufferably smug James of Scotland, Dudley, desperate, began angling for elevation. He wanted something more official than whispered rumours and midnight strolls. In 1564, Elizabeth finally gave him a title, Earl of Leicester. A step up, yes, but not what he'd been hoping for. He wanted to be king, but Elizabeth never let anyone share her throne, or her bed, at least not in any official way. Some say that Dudley's wife Amy had to die before Elizabeth could consider marrying him, but others argue that her death made marriage impossible. A queen wed to a man with a suspiciously dead wife. That wouldn't just raise eyebrows, would raise armies. Still, Dudley remained. Through all the years, all the suitors, all the shifting tides of policy and power, he stayed, and she let him. There's a moment in 1575 that's particularly telling. Elizabeth visits Dudley's estate at Kenilworth Castle. He spends a fortune, an absurd amount, turning the grounds into a fairyland, floating islands on the moat, nightly fireworks, musicians hiding in trees. He even builds a special tower just for her, with secret passageways connecting their rooms. The visit lasts 19 days, the longest she ever spent at any noble's home. You can practically hear the court's collective gasp echo across the centuries. 19 days. Just the two of them. No parliament, no ambassadors, no distractions. You imagine them walking the moonlit garden, her hand resting lightly on his arm, his eyes searching hers for permission. But if the moment ever came, if the door was ever opened, slammed shut, again before anyone could follow, because Elizabeth never allowed herself to be claimed, and yet she mourned him when he died in 1588, when the news reached her. She locked herself in her chamber and refused to eat. The letter he'd sent her just days before his death was found, years later, in a locked box by her bed. It was marked, his last letter. You look at her then, not as a queen, but as a woman who lived her entire life in the half-light between longing and restraint. A woman who may have loved, may have touched, may have yielded, but who never gave herself away entirely. Not to Robert Dudley, not to anyone, and not to history. The torches burn lower now, casting long shadows over the black and gold tapestries that line the Queen's privy chamber. You lean against the doorway, listening to the hum of velvet gowns brushing flagstones, and you begin to understand something. Elizabeth didn't just happen to be known as the Virgin Queen. She branded it, if modern rulers weaponize social media. Elizabeth, I weaponized her womb tonight. You're watching her craft a persona so powerful that it outlives her by centuries. A woman made not of flesh, but of symbols. You see her step into the role like slipping into ceremonial robes, Virgin, goddess, mother of the realm. But let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't accidental. It was strategy, one of the most successful political campaigns in history. You're standing now in the Great Gallery of Hampton Court. It's 1563, and Elizabeth is being priest again to marry. Parliament grovels, ambassadors threaten. The Privy Council nearly begs. She smiles sweetly, takes the quill, and writes her famous reply. I am already bound unto a husband, which is the kingdom of England. Mic drop. That quote goes viral before viral exists. But don't think this is just another historical power move. The deeper you look, the more twisted it gets. The Tudor court is obsessed with her body, its purity, its productivity, its visibility. Her menstrual cycles are noted by her ladies-in-waiting. Her weight is commented on by foreign dignitaries. Her virginity becomes a matter of state, debated like taxation. It's uncomfortable, even by Renaissance standards. And Elizabeth, she leans into it. She adopts the virginity mantle with theatrical flair. In portraits, she's dressed like the moon, cold, untouchable, orbited by lesser stars. Her face becomes porcelain, frozen in agelessness. Her hairline creeps back unnaturally high, the result of plucking, yes, but also symbolism, the high forehead of classical beauty, and power, always power. You move closer to one such portrait now, the Darnley portrait, from 1575. Elizabeth stares out with a slight smirk, her ruff exploding around her like a celestial corona. Look closer. No shadows touch her face. There's no depth, no flaw. She's become iconography, and still the whispers grow, because of course, nobody really believes she's a virgin. Not the way she flirts, not the way Dudley looks at her, not the way her favorites come and go like summer storms. But they play along, because her virginity, whether literal or not, is useful to everyone, especially Elizabeth. You hear a joke whispered at court. She hath many suitors, but no husband, many nights, but no morning after. Cheeky, possibly true, but this isn't just about her personal life. The implications are far bigger. If Elizabeth had married, especially early in her reign, she'd have ceded power to a foreign prince, to an ambitious noble, to a husband who might claim the throne by proximity. Marriage would have made her vulnerable. Pregnant, she'd be bedridden and politically exposed. A husband might rule for her, or worse, rule her. By remaining unmarried, she stays at the center of the map. All alliances must pass through her. All suitors must beg for her favor. She holds every card. Still, she doesn't just play the virgin card. She gilds it, polishes it, and mounts it on a jeweled throne. She lets poets praise her chastity in language so flowery it gives you hay fever. She has entire pageants staged, where allegorical figures like chastity and fortitude kneel before her and declare her the new Astrea, the virgin goddess of justice returned to earth. Subtlety? Absolutely not. It gets weirder. She begins requiring her ladies to dress modestly, not outshining her. She forbids them to marry without her permission. She demands confessions if they're suspected of romantic entanglements. One lady is banished for secretly marrying a courtier. Another is imprisoned in the Tower for becoming pregnant by a royal cousin. And yet, Elizabeth wears gowns so tight they must be sewn onto her. She dances provocatively at court masques. Her bodices dip low, her jewels flash. She even jokes with suitors about wedding night expectations. One night, she tells a French ambassador, "I may have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the stomach of a king and the discretion of a nun." You almost believe her, almost. But some people see through the performance. You hear the voice of Mary, Queen of Scots, muttering from her prison cell, calling Elizabeth the barren harlot. Ouch! Pot calling the kettle scandalous. Some foreign observers write home that the Queen makes a great show of chastity, but methinks she doth protest too much. One claims he saw a young page boy leaving her room with his stockings misbuttoned. Did he? You'll never know. That's the power of image. And Elizabeth understood that better than anyone. Here's a quirky tidbit. She banned all portraits of herself that showed her aging. Artists were required to use a set of approved facial templates to ensure she always looked 30, even when she was 60. Imagine government-issued Photoshop but with more roughs and less mercy. By the 1580s, Elizabeth is well into middle age, still unmarried, still untouched, at least in public memory, and still playing the virgin card like a seasoned gambler who knows the game's been rigged, but she rigged it herself. But this performance is beginning to wear thin. Her temper shortens. Her favourites grow bolder. 1. The dashing Earl of Essex will soon try something very foolish. But for now, you linger in the Hall of Mirrors, watching a woman reflect and refract the expectations of a patriarchal world into something truly singular. Elizabeth isn't just a woman now. She's an idea, and ideas, as you'll soon see, are harder to kill than queens. The door creaks open to a place few ever truly entered Delabeth's inner court. That strange constellation of men who orbited her more intimately than advisers, more carefully than suitors, and more hungrily than saints. You step softly, your breath misting in the cool air, and behind the heavy crimson curtain you glimpse what the world was never meant to see. A queen whose court was built on the tension between propriety and desire. Welcome to Whitehall Palace, where nearly 2,000 people live, work, gossip, and guard. But at its glittering centre, shielded by etiquette, rank, and walls lined in velvetees, the Queen's privy lodgings. A world within world, and at its very heart. Men, at first glance, you expect to see the usual suspects: secretaries, musicians, tutors, maybe a page boy or two. But the deeper you look, the stranger it gets. Elizabeth surrounds herself with young, educated, sweet-smelling, well-dressed men. Courtiers who recite poetry, dance elegantly, flirt dangerously, and know how to flatter her without grovelling. They are called her sweet boys, and they run this place. One ambassador mutters bitterly that the Queen is ruled by her pretty lads, and the court, in turn, ruled by them. They help her dress, they carry her gloves, they compose verses that suggest, just gently, that they dream of her lips. They perform in Musk's elaborate court plays, where they dance in doublets and tights, and declare eternal loyalty to their bright and sovereign goddess. One night, you peer into a candlelit rehearsal for a masque called The Virgin's Triumph. In it, Elizabeth sits watching from a gilded throne as 4 of her courtiers, each dressed as a different virtue, chastity, wisdom, courage, and devotion, compete for her favor through dance and poetry. The performance ends with them lying prostrate before her, declaring that no mortal love can hold her majesty, for she is love's mistress, not its slave. You're starting to get it, aren't you? This wasn't politics, this was theatre. And Elizabeth was both playwright and star. But underneath the satin and metaphor lies something far more intimate, because these men weren't just props. She shared meals with them, laughed at their jokes, got jealous when they married. She gave them nicknames: Eyes, Swallow, Bonnie Boot. She pouted when they flirted with other women. She called them to her side when she was ill. And of course, she touched them. Yes, she touched them. In public, in private, with a familiarity that scandalized the stiff-necked foreign dignitaries. She'd lean into them mid-conversation, playfully slap their shoulders, run fingers along their sleeves, all technically innocent, all visibly charged. Historians still argue whether these gestures were maternal, manipulative, or erotic. Likely, they were all three. But even in this heady, perfumed atmosphere, there were rule-strict unspoken ones. For example, no man could enter the Queen's bedchamber without invitation. Even favourites needed permission. And while Elizabeth might let one kneel at her feet or lace her bodice, they had to maintain an illusion of distance. That illusion, though, it got thin. Take Christopher Hatton, one of her favourites in the 1570s, a courtier with a dancer's grace and a lawman's cunning. She called him Lids, short for lids of love, referencing his fluttery eyelashes. He called her eyes, in turn. They exchanged letters in code, and during one infamous masque, he performed a solo dance so flirtatious that one nobleman wrote, "Methought her majesty blushed, though whether from delight or memory I dare not say." And then there's the Earl of Oxford, a poet with a scandalously sharp tongue and a private theatre company to match. He once gifted Elizabeth a play in which a virginal queen is seduced by a foreign prince, only for the prince to vanish by dawn. When she scolded him, he smirked and said, "'Tis just a dream, Majesty. You're in the garden now." Walking past the clipped boxwoods and gilded fountains, just behind a hedge, Elizabeth and one of her boys stroll arm in arm, laughing softly. One of her ladies peeks, sighs, and pulls the curtain shut again. Not everyone liked the way she ruled her inner court. Many of her ladies-in-waiting, especially the older, more traditional ones, complained about familiarities unbecoming a maiden queen. Some even threatened to leave her service if she didn't control herself. But she didn't care. Or if she did, she never showed it. Instead, she did something brilliant. She used the ambiguity by surrounding herself with attractive, desirable men, but never quite giving herself to any of them. She created the illusion of endless potential. Foreign rulers hoped they might still woo her. English nobles hoped they might still rise through flirtation. Poets spun fantasies. Diplomats schemed. And through it all, Elizabeth kept the mystery alive. Here's a curious detail. During her reign, a surprising number of court pregnancies were hushed up. But not hers. No rumors of morning sickness. No suspicious absences. No mysterious illnesses conveniently covered by parades. Either she was remarkably discreet or remarkably untouched, so why not give in? Why not take a lover, even secretly? You watch her pause in the hall of mirrors, staring at her own reflection in a gown stitched with thousands of tiny pearls. You see it, suddenly the stakes. For Elizabeth, sex wasn't just a personal act. It was a political gamble. One pregnancy, one indiscretion, one whispered truth could unravel everything. So she flirts, she touches, she lets them dream, and then she locks the door. You walk through that door, now past the laughter, past the perfume, past the sighs that never quite rise to moans, and into the secret chamber of a woman who built a kingdom on restraint, and whose power somehow only grew the less she gave. The door clicks softly behind you as you enter the most private realm of all, not the throne room, not the Privy Council, but Elizabeth's bedchamber. Not many are ever allowed here, and even fewer leave unchanged. The fire snaps low in the grate, the tapestries whisper in the draught, and all around you the scent of rosewater and powdered iris clings to the silence, like a secret too old to speak aloud. It's not just a place to sleep. This room, small and soft and utterly fortified, is the pulsing heart of Elizabeth's entire kingdom. Because in Tudor England, the bedchamber isn't only about rest-its, where power is negotiated, messages are passed, and appearances are staged. For Elizabeth, it's also the place where public fantasy and private reality collide in layers of velvet and lace. She doesn't sleep alone, not always. Her ladies-in-waiting sleep nearby, some even in the same room, a constant presence of eyes and ears. And yet, somehow, lovers still find ways to get close. Robert Dudley is one. You remember him. You can still feel him in this room. He wasn't the only one, though. There was also Walter Raleigh, ambitious, swaggering, and poetic in a slightly exhausting way. He once wrote a poem comparing Elizabeth to Diana, the Queen, whose heart he could never hope to touch, though flame near I must. Elizabeth liked him. She flirted with him. She knighted him. Then she locked him in the Tower when he got her lady-in-waiting pregnant. Oops, then there was Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex. But we're not there yet. That storm is still brewing. Tonight, you're looking around at the furnishings, the paintings, the details that tell a quieter story. The curtains around the bed are heavy and embroidered with pomegranate symbols of fertility. Irony noted. Her pillows are stitched with mattos, like semper idem, always the same. A not-so-subtle hint at consistency in a world of changing allegiances. And on the low table by her bed, letters, hundreds of them, tied with ribbon or folded like little secrets. Some from suitors, some from courtiers, some, like one from the Duke of Alençon, who once referred to her as ma petite grenouille, my little frog, are so saccharine you almost gag. She kept them all. Why? Because Elizabeth collected admiration the way other monarchs collected gold. She needed to. Her power wasn't passed down by mail, as it was cultivated, curated, and constantly reinforced. She used everything at her disposal to maintain it, especially the illusion of availability, not sexually, necessarily, but romantically. She was always about to fall in love, always just one step away from marriage, just enough to keep every man and every kingdom on their toes. But what happened in this room at night, after the last candle was blown out and the tapestries stopped moving? Did anyone ever slip beneath those sheets? Historians still argue whether Elizabeth ever permitted anyone to cross that final, forbidden threshold. Some say yes, citing those same long hours spent with Dudley or the glances she exchanged with men like Hatton or Essex. Others say she wouldn't risk it, that even the tiniest scandal would have shattered her throne. Yet the evidence, it dances in shadows. Here's a strange little detail. Elizabeth reportedly locked her own bedroom door every night, taking the key with her. Not her ladies, not her guards, her. That's an unusual move for a monarch. Most kings and queens slept under constant watch. Not Elizabeth. She insisted on that final layer of privacy. Just her thoughts, and the locked door. Was it fear or freedom? You look at the bed again. You imagine her lying there stiff as marble, or soft with sighs, alone or not, wearing her face mask of egg whites and honey, her hair unpinned, her body free of the jeweled armor she wore by day. Does she dream? Or just plan? And here's another oddity. She slept very little, often just a few hours, sometimes none at all. Her insomnia was legendary. Her courtiers would note the candle in her window still lit at 3 or 4 a.m., Some believed she read late into the night. Others whispered that she was haunted by ghosts, but the likeliest answer, she was thinking, always thinking. Because being the Virgin Queen wasn't a passive role. It was active, exhausting, demanding, and endlessly lonely. That loneliness comes up in letters she wrote but never sent. In one, scrawled in haste, she writes, "I may have all the eyes of Europe upon me, yet I am never looked at for what I am." What was she really? Here's a fringe theory for you. Some have suggested that Elizabeth's chastity wasn't just strategic, was personal, that she may have suffered from physical anomalies. There were whispers of imperfections that made intimacy difficult or impossible. Nothing confirmed, of course, just rumors, vague and cruel, which she neither confirmed nor denied, more likely. She chose this path, not because she hated love, but because she didn't trust it. You remember her childhood, now her mother beheaded, her father monstrous, her first brush with male affection veering straight into scandal. Her body was politicized before she even had agency. Love, for Elizabeth, wasn't safe. It was a currency that always cost too much. So she slept alone, and even in her solitude, she turned her bedchamber into a stage. Visitors were carefully choreographed. Her nightwear was embroidered with imperial symbols. The final image each courtier saw Elizabeth seated in her backed chair. Silk robe, flowing, a book in one hand and her crown in the other, was as calculated as a royal decree. This wasn't just where she slept. It was where she reminded everyone who she was, and who she refused to be. Now, the candle gutters low, the door clicks again, the room empties, and the Queen, once again, is alone with her silence. But if you think the game of courtship is overthinking, again, because in the coming years, a new suitor will enter the scene. He's young, he's bold, he's dangerous, and unlike Dudley, he won't be satisfied staying outside the Queen's door. You rise before the sun now, slipping out into the corridors of a palace, waking slowly embers rekindled in grates. Soft footsteps of chambermaids carrying fresh rushes, the clink of pewter cups being polished, the scent of beeswax, polish, and roasted oats lingers in the air, and from somewhere above, you hear the first sounds of Elizabeth's morning preparations, and below it all, the whisper begins again. Essex has arrived. He is already the talk of the court by the time you reach the Great Gallery. Robert Devereux, the second Earl of Essex, has returned from Ireland, late, of course, dishevelled, defiant, but dazzling, always dazzling. He walks like a man who thinks the world should apologize for being slow. You spot him tall, golden-haired, green-eyed, far too handsome for his own good. The courtiers cluster around him like birds around a freshly seeded field. He plays to the crowd, but his eyes keep flicking upward, toward the Queen's chambers, like a boy waiting to be summoned to the headmistress, or a lover waiting for his flame. Elizabeth finally emerges, wearing a bodice stiff with rubies and an expression even harder. The air turns, electric. You've seen her look like this before when dealing with Spanish ambassadors or traitorous earls. But here, with Essex, it's different. It's not just fury. It's disappointment, and something stranger, darker, something that doesn't belong in politics, but lives very comfortably in heartbreak. Essex bows low, too low. The court freezes. You know the history already. Their connection wasn't just political. She had plucked him from obscurity, elevated him, trusted him, loved him. Historians still argue whether that love was maternal, romantic, or both. or neither, or worse calculated. He was 30 years younger. She called him her sweet Robin. He called her his fair lady, and in private letters he was reckless. He wrote of how her beauty is unmatched, how her favour lifts his soul like wine, and Elizabeth she let him get away with things no one else could dot until Ireland. That's where it started to unravel. Elizabeth sent him to suppress rebellion. He botched it. Instead of marching on rebels, he made peace with them. Then, worst of all, he returned to court without permission and burst into her bedchamber before she'd had time to put on her wig. Scandalous? Absolutely. But intimate, too. You don't barge into a queen's private chamber unless you think you're untouchable. And maybe he did think that. Or maybe, just maybe, he was right. Until he wasn't. Because Elizabeth did what she always did with men who disappointed her. She put on the crown and stepped back behind it. First came the cold silence, then house arrest, then the slow, freezing isolation. And when Essex raised a rebellion in desperation storming through London with a ragtag band of nobles and idealists, Elizabeth responded with swift, cold iron. She signed his death warrant with a steady hand, and yet a single ring lies in the Tower's records. A small gold token D Essex ring. Legend says Elizabeth gave it to him, with a promise. If he ever angered her beyond words, he need only send it back, and she would forgive him. But the ring never arrived. One version says he tried to send it, but it was intercepted by enemies. Another claims he lost faith and didn't try. Still others say the ring is just a myth, conjured by playwrights and romantics too sad to face the truth, that the Queen killed the man she may have loved. And if that's not Shakespearean enough for you, guess what? He did write about it. Some say the character of Hamlet, melancholy, obsessed with betrayal, torn between love and vengeance, was inspired in part by Essex himself. The timelines overlap, the themes echo. Elizabeth even banned one of the plays on political grounds. But back to the present, or rather, you're present in that glittering, venomous court. You feel the eyes of every noble fix on Elizabeth. Will she forgive Essex again? Will she embrace him as her golden boy, restore his titles, let him back into her bedchamber, metaphorical or otherwise? She doesn, single quotes. She dismisses him with a few clipped words and turns away, leaving the gallery chilled in her wake. Still, later that night, you hear soft weeping from behind her chamber door. No one will say it's her. Of course not. Queens don't cry, except sometimes, alone. Maybe they do. Here's your quirky detail of the night. In the weeks leading up to Essex's execution, Elizabeth's maids reported that she would sometimes forget to eat or sit staring at a wall for hours, holding a mirror in her lap. She would whisper his name like a question, sometimes like a curse. And after his death, she never mentioned him again. Instead, she aged fast. The flame-red wigs got bigger, the makeup got thicker, the face behind it all, it started to crack. And yet, no matter how heartbreak hollowed her, she never let her court see it. Not really. She buried her pain in ritual, ceremony, and the ever-tightening corset of monarchy. She wore virginity not just like a badge, but like armor, because Essex wasn't just a favorite. He was the last man who got close enough to hurt her. After him, there would be no more flirtation, no more poetry, no more illusions. But for tonight, you can still feel his shadow in the walls, in the Queen's tightened jaw, in the way her eyes linger on empty chairs. And you wonder, as you leave her chamber behind once more, was Robert Devereux, the man who finally broke the heart of the Virgin Queen? Or was he simply the one who reminded her that she still had one? You wake to bells tolling across the rooftops of London, distant and ceremonial, as if the city itself is clearing its throat. The air smells of rain on stone and crushed rosemary from the palace gardens, and somewhere behind you, a servant is murmuring something about letters, always letters. But this morning, the Queen's mood is unreadable. She has summoned her council, not for war, not for policy, but for marriage. You blink. Marriage. Now. Yes. Again. After everything. After decades of silence on the matter, Elizabeth, like an actress slipping into an old costume, resumes the role of bride-to-be. Only this time, the theatre is more transparent and the audience far more jaded. The suitor, a French prince, again, this time it's Francois, Duke of Anjou, younger brother of the King of France. A Catholic, a foreigner, a man Elizabeth nicknames, with some affection, Frog. You join the procession to the council chamber, where maps and treaties lie strewn across long oak tables, and where the Queen leans ageless, enigmatic, ringed fingers tapping her chair's edge. "Shall I marry him?" she asks, not gently, not hopefully. Like a dare, the room stiffens. You can feel the calculations behind every pair of eyes. The match would ease tensions with France, create an alliance against Spain, soften Catholic suspicions. But he's French and Catholic, and 24 years her junior. You wait for someone to speak. No one does. So Elizabeth does what Elizabeth always does. She makes it a performance. She has Anjou brought to court. They dance together at banquets. She allows portraits of them to circulate, even allows private meetings unsupervised, scandalous by any measure, and yet entirely deliberate. The court watches breathless, as if England itself hangs in the balance, because it does. Historians still argue whether this courtship was real or entirely strategic, whether Elizabeth truly entertained the idea of marrying Anjou, or whether she simply needed to appear as though she mighty long enough to nudge alliances, unsettle Spain, and keep Parliament guessing. You, for your part, watch her with Anjou closely. He is not Essex, nor Leicester, not even Philip of Spain. He is boyish, eager, a little pompous, forever misreading her irony as sincerity. And Elizabeth plays him like a lute. One moment she's teasing him in French, the next she's dismissing him in Latin. Once you catch a moment in the garden, Anjou reaches for her hand, and she lets him take it, but only for a breath. Then she withdraws, laughing, her fan snapping closed like a guillotine. Behind that laugh is something else, a calculation, or perhaps a quiet grief. After all, Elizabeth is now over 40. Marriage no longer offers heirs, it offers risk. It would mean ceding power, legally and symbolically, becoming not a monarch, but a wife. And Elizabeth will never be a wife. Still, she lets the court believe it might happen, plays the flirtation to the very edge, gifts Anjou a ring, lets the poets write verses of the fairest lily and the boldest frog. But then she stops. She sends him away. The official reason: political unrest, religious pressure, English distaste for foreign matches. Parliament had grown mutinous, and Puritan pamphlets called her choice an insult to the Reformation. The real reason, no one knows. Perhaps she never intended to marry him at all. Perhaps she came close and panicked. Or perhaps she simply realized something profound and terrible. If she married, she'd have to stop being the Virgin Queen. because that title wasn't just propaganda anymore. It had become her identity, her myth, her protection. You've heard the speeches, the famous Tilbury oration. I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king. The heart of a king, not the heart of a wife. Never that. But here's your quirky morsel for tonight. During Anjou's stay, Elizabeth commissioned a miniature portrait of herself to be painted on a locket, set with diamonds and enamel. She gave it to Anjou as a token of favor. That locket eventually found its way back to France, passed down quietly for generations, till it vanished entirely during the French Revolution, lost like so many of her secrets. Still, in the weeks after his departure, Elizabeth doesn't mourn in public. She tightens her corsets, sharpens her speeches, and dons white silk in place of mourning black. The message is clear. She belongs to no man. But the letters tell a different story. You see, one by accident or fate. A page folded and refolded, written in her unmistakable hand, the ink smudged where her rings had pressed into the paper. To my dear brother of France, she writes, though the day parts us, know you were held in regard beyond duty. I am no maid, yet neither am I. A bride, no maid. Not a bride. It's one of the most cryptic lines Elizabeth ever wrote. And you're not the only one puzzled by it. Historians still dissect it, wondering, was this a rare slip of honesty? A confession that she had not remained physically untouched, but still refused the role of wife? Or is it, as some argue, a philosophical statement about how power made her something other? A sovereign whose identity transcended the roles society had for women? You'll never know for sure, but as she walks past you that night, her train sweeping the stones, her eyes dry and clear, you can't help but wonder what she left unsaid. Not just to Anjou, to everyone, because Elizabeth, above all, was a woman who weaponized silence, who made mysteries into tools, and who, perhaps, loved in her own way even if no one could ever quite prove it. So when the French prince rides away, broken-hearted and bewildered, don't pity him too much. He never stood a chance. You wake to a storm rumbling above Hampton Court low, sullen thunder that makes the diamond panes of your window shudder in their casements. Somewhere beyond the misty yew trees, the river Thames glides by like a black ribbon, and above it, all silence. Not courtly silence, silence. The kind that seeps into corners. The kind that wraps around secrets, because something is changing. Elizabeth is aging. You don't notice it at first. She still rides daily, still delivers speeches with a fire that could melt cannonballs, still brushes off petitioners with that slow, sardonic wave of her hand. But now there are pauses. A stumble on the stairs, a nosebleed that stains her collar, crimson, a lingering cough after a cold. March wind, the court begins to whisper, no longer about her lovers or suitors or scandals, but about time, about what comes after her, and about one man who seems to grow stronger as she wanes. Robert Devereux, 2nd Earl of Essex. Essex, the golden boy. Essex, who had once burst into her chambers without permission and lived to tell the tale. Essex, who danced too close to danger and made it look like a flirtation. He is everything Leicester once was, and none of the discretion. You watch him parade through court in velvet doublets and swaggering boots, throwing coins to servants, laughing too loudly at plays. The Queen, decades his senior, smiles at his insolence, but there's something behind her smile now, something harder, more brittle. Historians still debate the nature of their relationship. Was it truly romantic, maternal, strategic? Did Elizabeth see Essex as a mirror of her younger self, brilliant risk-taker with the world at his feet, or as a dangerous child playing with matches? You see hints. A hand that lingers too long on his shoulder. A letter smuggled out under midnight torchlight. A pearl earring returned without comment. Yet the tension grows when Essex defies her orders during a military campaign in Ireland, abandoning his post. Returning to London without permission, everything snaps. He bursts into her bedchamber unannounced. The Queen, half-dressed, fuming, screams at him in a language you don't understand. He kneels. She strikes him. It is not theatrical, it is fury. You learn later, she had sworn never to see him again. But power doesn't yield easily, and affection doesn't vanish cleanly. The Queen has Essex imprisoned, then freed, then welcomed but only to be betrayed again. He organizes a rebellion, a real one, with soldiers and pamphlets and street cries for the true government of England. And Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen, now nearly 70, is forced to do what she dreads most. She signs his death warrant. It takes her hours. She picks up the quill, puts it down, walks the length of the room, talks aloud to no one. He was like a sun, she murmurs, or a star I followed too long. Finally, the signature, the seal. The silenced Essex is executed on Tower Hill that night. You find her in a private chamber, sitting before a fire that's almost out. She is not weeping, but she is holding a ring, not just any ring, the ring one Essex had sent her from prison, pleading for mercy. It had never reached her, intercepted by someone, somewhere. Some say it was a calculated move by her enemies. Others say fate simply lost its way that day, but Elizabeth holds it now. Too late, and you swear you see something inside her collapse. Here's a little-known tidbit. For your dreams tonight, in the months after Essex's execution, the Queen refused to sleep in a bed. She stood for hours each night, leaning against cushions or pacing her chambers, unable to rest. Her servants had to beg her to eat. She would not change her clothes. She avoided mirrors. When someone dared suggest she needed sleep, she whispered, "Must a queen be human, then? Must she?" It's a question you can't answer, but you begin to understand that Elizabeth's virginity, whether literal or metaphorical, wasn't just about abstaining from sex. It was about untouchability, invulnerability, the last sacred thing she had to keep herself separate from pain, from betrayal, from the ordinary sorrows of being just a woman. And now, with Essex gone, even that veil is fraying. Court painters try to flatter her portraits, thick with powdered perfection and jewels like armor. But the court can see the truth. Her once fierce eyes have dulled. Her walk slows. Her voice cracks. Even her feigned wigs seem heavier, more theatrical. Still, she rules. Still, she speaks. Still, she delivers biting jests that leave men speechless. But fewer laugh now. Fewer dare look too closely. The Virgin Queen is turning into a relic, and you, standing beside her throne as the days grow shorter, realize something profound. That myth can only hold back mortality for so long. Rain drums across the palace roofs like thousands of tiny soldiers marching toward something dreadful. In the corridors of Whitehall, everyone walks a little more softly. Even the jesters keep their bells hushed, because tonight we return to a death that won't die. Amy Robsart, the name still ripples like a ghost through the tapestries of Elizabeth's court. You remember Robert Dudley's young wife, the inconvenient one, the one who, in September 1560, was found dead at the foot of a staircase with a broken neck. Officially, it was called an accident, an unfortunate fall. She had been alone. They said the servants were out. No one saw a thing. But if that explanation sounds suspiciously convenient to you, don't worry. You're not alone. Historians still argue whether Amy Robsart's death was a tragic mishap, or a cold-blooded assassination staged to look like one, because the timing, frankly, was too good to be true. At the time of her death, Dudley was climbing fast. He'd wormed his way into Elizabeth's inner orbit, flirting, dancing, whispering. Plans in the gardens at twilight. The Queen's affections were no longer subtle. Their closeness was the worst-kept secret in England. Foreign ambassadors reported it with increasingly incredulous ink. But there was one problem. Amy Dudley couldn't marry Elizabeth while Amy was alive. And then Amy wasn't. You shiver, thinking about the house where she died, come the place. It's mostly gone now, lost to rot and rumour. But back then, it was a lonely manor, inconveniently remote. Her death occurred at the bottom of a narrow staircase, with no reliable witnesses. Her neck was broken in 2 places, but strangely, her body showed no signs of a fall. No bruises. On the hands, no defensive wounds, just a clean break, as though she'd been dropped. Even Queen Elizabeth was horrified. She locked herself in her chambers when the news arrived. For days, she refused to see Dudley. You suspect she wasn't mourning Amy, but rather calculating the damage to her own image. Because now, if she married Dudley, everyone would believe she'd had Amy killed. And Elizabeth was many things, but she was never that careless. Robert. Dudley begged for a private audience. He wrote desperate letters. But when he was finally admitted, she met him with ice. No tears, no embrace, just this. The people are watching, Robert, and they will not forget. Here's the kicker. Years later, a man named William Cecilder, Queen's principal secretary, was accused of having orchestrated the whole thing. Why? To trap Dudley. To ensure he could never marry Elizabeth without dragging them both into scandal. It's wild, but not impossible. The Tudors were nothing if not conniving. There's even a quirky little theory less accepted, but undeniably juicy, that Amy's death was staged not by Cecil or Dudley, but by a foreign agent. A warning to Elizabeth: stay away from marriage. Stay away from alliances that threaten European balance. You can almost imagine it. A silent blade in the shadows. A push. A whisper into the night. Whatever the truth, the fallout was permanent. Dudley never married Elizabeth. Not officially, but he stayed by her side, her sweet Robin, her master of the horse, her constant companion. And yet, something had shifted. Where once there was promise, now there was myth. Elizabeth couldn't marry him, even if she wanted to, because if she did, she'd no longer be the Virgin Queen. She'd be the woman who killed for love. You pass a tapestry in the hallway. It shows a unicorn chained beneath a tree, beautiful, wild, forever captive. That's how they saw her. How she wanted to be seen, unreachable, untouchable, above the mess of mortal passion. And yet, she kept Dudley's last letter in a box, beside her bed until the day she died. Did she love him? Did she blame him? You'll never know, but one night, years after Amy's death, Elizabeth is said to have turned to her ladies in waiting and murmured, "Better beg a woman and single than queen and murdered wife." It's one of those razor-edged comments she often made. Was it meant to be a confession, a warning, or a joke with no punchline? The line between sincerity and survival was always blurred for her. So tonight, as you tiptoe down palace halls scented with wax and damp rushes, you feel the weight of Amy's name settle around your shoulders again. Not just as a tragic footnote, but as the hinge upon which Elizabeth's future turned dot. No marriage, no heirs, no escape. Only power, but power built on death doesn't sleep easy, and neither do you. The candles burn lower in the Queen's chambers, but the real fire burns elsewhere beneath the floorboards, behind the eyes of courtiers, and in the coded ink of intercepted letters. You're in the nerve center of a kingdom built on secrets, where the difference between flirtation and treason is often a matter of who's listening. Tonight, we meet the man who is always listening, Sir Francis Walsingham, Elizabeth's spy master, her ghost in the walls, the man who invented modern surveillance centuries too early and slept like a baby anyway. You slip through his shadowed world, a maze of whispers, double agents, and velvet-lined betrayal. He wasn't flashy like Dudley, or hot-tempered like Essex. He didn't duel, he didn't dance. But Walsingham had a different seduction, information. He read every letter, tracked every courier, and knew who kissed whom before they even laced up their bodices. And when it came to Elizabeth's personal life, oh, he watched. You lean in as he studies a freshly unsealed scroll parchment, still smelling of wax and scandal. It's from a nobleman in France, written in delicate Latin. The translation: the Queen appears fond of her horsemaster in ways not fitting for a virgin of state. Walsingham doesn't flinch. He simply tucks it into his files, alongside dozens of other such insinuations. There's an entire folder labeled Dudley Affairs Denials versus Eyewitness Reports. Mainstream historians agree Walsingham wasn't just tracking Catholics and assassination plots. He was also managing the Queen's reputation, and sometimes, to preserve that reputation, you had to blur a few lines, forge a few signatures, burn a few inconvenient pages. There's a fringe theory just spicy enough to stick that Walsingham doctored or destroyed letters between Elizabeth and Robert Dudley, not to lie, but to shape the truth into something England could survive. A queen can rule alone. A queen in love, that's messy. That invites enemies to circle. It's said he once intercepted a letter laced with subtle eroticism, Elizabeth's own hand, allegedly. She used a coded metaphor. My son rises only in your stable. Now, could that mean she admired his horsemanship? Sure, could it also be the 16th century equivalent of texting you up to your court crush? Also yes. What happened to that letter? Gone into the fire. Because Walsingham believed in England first, Queen second, and sentiment never. But there's another letter, far more chilling. It arrived unsigned, with trembling ink. The author warned that the lady who lives nearest the Queen's privy chamber hath grown round in the belly and vanished to Kent. A pregnancy scandal, a false alarm, or pure fiction from an enemy agent. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth ever concealed a pregnancy. No confirmed case exists, but the sheer volume of rumors, foreign and domestic, suggests something didn't quite align with the virginal script. And Walsingham, he silenced them. One woman was found drowned in the Thames the week after whispering about the Queen's swollen skirts. Another man, a printer, mysteriously fell from his horse after circulating a woodcut of Elizabeth, visibly expecting coincidence or counterintelligence. The line between espionage and stagecraft was razor-thin. Walsingham understood this better than anyone. He wasn't just preserving a monarchy, he was preserving a myth. and in doing so, he made sure no scandal, sexual, political, or supernatural, ever stuck long enough to become permanent. You walk with him one stormy evening as he heads toward the tower. A prisoner waits there, once a trusted courtier, now accused of improper proximity to Her Majesty. The charge is vague, the evidence non-existent. But Walsingham doesn't need facts, he needs silence. He enters the cell, you hear nothing. 10 minutes later, the man is weeping. An hour later, he's banished to Ireland. No trial, no mention in the records. Just a footnote in someone else's diary. He dared touch her wrist in public. That's how fragile the fantasy was. Walsingham died with boxes of secrets sealed. Under his house many burned, others mysteriously misplaced during later reigns. Some say he kept a ledger of the Queen's personal indulgences. Others claim he left behind only lies. But one undeniable fact remains. If Elizabeth I wasn't a virgin, the one man most likely to have known took it to his grave. You return to the palace uneasy. Every glance in the corridor might be a report, every whisper a trap. And yet Elizabeth trusted Walsingham more than anyone, because he never judged her. He just managed her, like a brand, like a storm, and like any good illusionist, he made sure the audience never saw the sleight of hand. You find yourself in the stillness of the Privy Gallery at dusk, long velvet curtains brushing the stone floor, whispering as they sway. Here, appearances are gospel and proximity is power. But tonight, you're not watching a coronation or a royal masque. You're watching the daily dance of control, etiquette, and one very peculiar myth, chastity belts. Now, let's get something clear right away. Did Elizabeth's ladies actually wear chastity belts? Historians mostly agree, probably not. The clanky, padlocked contraptions popularized in Victorian-era illustrations were largely myths or later propaganda. Still, the Tudor court did impose extreme controls on female sexuality. The metaphorical chastity belt. Oh, that was very real and tightly buckled. You wander through the Queen's privy chambers, flanked by her ladies-in-waiting. These weren't idle handmaidens. They were noble women, chosen for loyalty, discretion, and critically clean reputations. One whiff of scandal, and they were gone. Banished, disgraced, sometimes quietly, married off to a distant cousin with a gouty foot and a leaky roof. You watch as one lady fumbles her embroidery when a handsome court musician passes too close. That glance, too long. That smile, suspiciously warm. Later, she's replaced. No explanation given. Elizabeth ran her court like a surgeon's scalpel, precise, elegant, and ruthless. She once shouted at a lady who dared to wed in secret, "You may have had one man, but you shall never have mine." That man, of course, being attention, affection, the magnetic pull of the monarch's gaze. The Virgin Queen expected virginity, or at least the performance of it from every woman around her. And as for herself, well, let's say her policies spoke louder than her prayers. You peek into her elaborate dressing ritual, a performance in itself. Each layer of her gown, each powdered pearl and pin, was part armor, part theater. Her bodices were high-necked, her sleeves stiff and sculptural, her corsets iron-boned. There's a fringe theory that Elizabeth herself wore something akin to a chastity device, not a belt, but a girdle of chainmail silk meant to project invulnerability. Symbolic, but still unnerving. She once told a foreign ambassador, "My body is reserved, as is my realm. Mainstream historians accept that she cultivated this aura purposefully, not for religion, but strategy. Virginity was power. The idea that no man had ever touched her made her untouchable, neutral, divine, almost mythic, and everyone had to play along. Courtiers developed a bizarre set of etiquette rules when interacting with the queen. You were never to turn your back on her, speak too softly near her, or heaven forbid touch her hands unless she offered them. One Spanish envoy wrote, "I dared not lift my eyes to her, for her stare froze me as a statue." Another man claimed he was dismissed for commenting, "Her perfume lingers in the air like summer's last rose." Poetic? Yes. Overfamiliar? Also yes. Too familiar for a queen who had to embody all women while belonging to none. So where did the chastity belt rumor come from? It likely grew centuries later, as posthumous gossip collided with 19th century obsessions about female purity. Writers imagined Elizabeth as so fiercely virginal, she must have locked herself in iron just to prove it. But in her own time, she had subtler tools: surveillance, shame, and social exile. You overhear a whisper in a shadowed corridor to ladies in waiting, gossiping in French. One mentions a bedchamber incident. The other hushes her. Too loud, too risky. Later that week, only one of them remains. Elizabeth ruled her inner circle through a blend of emotional intimacy and calculated fear. She gave pet names, exchanged midnight gifts, even penned affectionate notes. But the moment someone's affection drifted towards someone else, the queen could become ice. You spot her watching two young nobles laughing at a window. They aren't even touching, just talking. But her stare hardens. One is reassigned to Ireland. The other begins wearing darker colors. There's a name for this: courtly claustrophobia. The feeling that every breath is observed, every word weighed. And in the center of it all, Elizabeth, possibly alone in a crowd. Historians still argue whether this environment reflected her own insecurities or a deliberate plan to prevent rival alliances. Some say she feared pregnancy not just as a scandal, but as a death sentence. Childbirth, in her day, killed 1 in 30. Others argue she feared emotional exposure even more, and so she built a world in which no one could safely love anyone else unless she orchestrated it. Was she paranoid? Or was she right? After all, love affairs had destroyed queens before her. Her own mother, Anne Boleyn, lost her head when whispers turned fatal. Elizabeth learned early in the palace. Desire could be a death warrant, so she became both warden and ward of her own virgin myth. You return to the court hall. Everything gleams, everyone smiles, but no one touches. And somewhere beneath the perfume and pearls, you sensed the ghost of a belt never worn, but always present. You trail behind the royal procession as it winds its way through the gardens of Nonsuch Palace, the late sun flickering through yew hedges and jewel-colored peacock feathers bobbing like court banners. But your attention is elsewhere. On the queen this time, but on the cocky, swaggering figure just behind her. He's tall, dashing, reckless, and very much not Robert Dudley. Meet Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex, Elizabeth's newest favourite. Nearly 30 years her junior, and an absolute storm in tight hose. When you first lay eyes on him, he's 20, ambitious, loud, already known for showing off his legs more than his. Latin. But make no mistake, he's no common court flirt. He's Dudley's stepson. Yes, that Dudley, the same man whose name was once whispered beside Elizabeth's in every bedchamber. Talk about awkward family dinners. But Essex plays it differently. Where Dudley was suave and secretive, Essex is brash, physical, and very public. And Elizabeth, she is entranced. You watch as she leans toward him during a hunt, laughter rippling from her mouth like a girl decades younger. He calls her Sweet Robin. She calls him Eyes. Nobody is quite sure whether to applaud, panic, or clear the room. You wonder if she sees in him a second chance, a youthful echo of the man she could never marry. Or maybe she simply enjoys watching the court squirm. He once burst into her bedchamber, while she was undressed shirtless himself, sword at his hip, demanding an audience. The court gasped. She let him stay. Historians still argue whether this was youthful folly, political calculation, or something more intimate. Elizabeth was known to punish men harshly for smaller offences unless she wanted to be shocked. Maybe Essex's boldness thrilled her, or maybe it terrified her. What's certain is this: he was not just another pretty face. She showered him with titles, command of the army in Ireland, and constant private audiences. Foreign ambassadors muttered that the Queen dotes like a mother-if. Mothers blushed and lingered by the window. But Essex was no Dudley. He lacked the elder statesman's tact, and his arrogance grew faster than his victories. You watch him bungle a rebellion in Ireland, return without permission, storm into the Queen's presence muddy boots, no bow. And for the first time, Elizabeth doesn't smile. She turns her back. There's a famous account, maybe apocryphal, of Elizabeth boxing his ears in front of the council. He, in turn, nearly draws his sword. From passion to fury in seconds. The two of them were fire meeting oil. Still, she forgives him again and again. He writes to her, I am yours more than I am mine. She writes back, you may be the cause of my death, or I of yours. Flirty, maybe, ominous, very, but Essex wanted more and more. When titles weren't enough, he wanted marriage. Not with Elizabeth. Mind you, he secretly wed one of her maids of honor. Oh no, that's the one thing you never do. Elizabeth explodes. The girl is banished. Essex is stripped of honors. The Queen stops speaking his name. He thought he was indispensable. He wasn't. What followed is something between Greek tragedy and Tudor farce. Essex gathers a ragtag group of supporters and storms London, trying to seize power. It lasts 6 hours. He's arrested, tried for treason, and sent to the Tower. As you stand outside the Tower walls, mist curling over the Thames, you imagine Elizabeth alone in her study. She signs the death warrant slowly, reluctantly. Some say she locked it away for days. Others claim her chief advisors forced her hand. Either way, Essex is executed, and Elizabeth, she never recovers from the loss. Years later, after her own death, a ring is found hidden in a box of velvet. A gold token said to have been a final plea from Essex for mercy. Some say she never saw it. Some say she saw it too late. Some say she wept over it in secret for the rest of her days. Historians still debate whether she loved him as a mother, a monarch, or a woman. Maybe all three, maybe none. But watching her face as she walks the garden alone, you understand one thing clearly. Essex was her last great passion. After him, there are no more favourites, no more scandalous gifts, no more flirtation. The Queen of England grows quieter, colder. She wears white more often. Her smiles fade, but her myth, that glows brighter. And maybe that's the trade-off. You don't get to be legend and human. You choose, or the crown chooses for you. You're back at court now, Hampton, to be precise, and it's tournament day. The green lists stretch out before you like a painted stage, and every knight glints like polished silver under the June sun. The crowd is giddy, ladies fluttering, fans and whispering wagers, but your eyes are on the balcony above the tilt-yard, where Elizabeth sits draped in gold tissue and white ermine, her red wig teased high, her fingers playing idly with a jeweled pomander. She's not watching the joust. She's watching him. Robert Dudley rides out in full pageantry, his armour a mirror of the Queen's heraldic colours. His horse bows. He bows deeper. Trumpets sound. Somewhere to your left, a lady sighs so audibly it earns a sharp elbow from her chaperone, and then just as the tilt begins, a challenge erupts. Not of lances or honour, of glances. A young noble, newly returned from France, leans in a bit too close to Elizabeth, whispers something behind a fan. She laughs only briefly, but Dudley sees it. His smile tightens. His jousting goes ragged. He wins, but just barely, by the end of the day. Rumours ripple faster than the banners. Elizabeth was seen touching the young man's sleeve. Dudley left early. The Queen snapped at her steward. A page was slapped, and in the shadow of it all, jealousy, sharp as a dagger beneath lace. You're beginning to realize this court is more theatre than government. Power is doled out in touches, nods, glances. A graze of fingers on a velvet cuff can change a man's fortunes. Too much eye contact, and you're out of favour. Too little, and you're irrelevant. There's even a handbook, the Book of Courtly Behaviour, printed discreetly in 1570, advising courtiers never to step closer than 3 paces from the Queen unless summoned. But rules bend when hormones and ambition mingle in candlelight. One night, you wander the long gallery after a feast. The torches hiss low. Voices echo from a curtained alcove, 2 gentlemen arguing in hushed but furious tones. I saw him kiss her hand. Twice. You saw wrong. She leaned into him. A soft scuffle. A blade half drawn. Then footsteps. Silence. It was not the first time a near-duel broke out over who had the Queen's favour. It wouldn't be the last, and Elizabeth, she thrives on it, not cruelly, but strategically. If one man has her ear, another does not. If one thinks himself beloved, he performs. If to compete for her glance, neither looks elsewhere. In that tension between desire and decorum she rules. Still, even the Queen has moments she cannot control. At court one winter's night, you spot her in a storm of temper. A lady of the chamber accidentally lets slip that one of the Queen's favourites has been secretly corresponding with a young widow. Elizabeth explodes. Her voice rises sharp and shrill, her fists clenched. She demands the woman be dismissed immediately and the favourite summoned. He arrives, trembling kneels, protests. She throws a slipper at his head. Later, historians would debate whether this account was exaggerated. They often are, but many agree she once tore a man's cloak with her bare hands. Another she had imprisoned for smiling too broadly at someone else. Jealousy, possibly, but don't mistake her for a spurned lover. This was power. Every flirtation not sanctioned by the Queen was an act of rebellion. And let's be honest, some of her anger wasn't just about betrayal. It was about age. As the years wore on, Elizabeth aged outwardly, lines carved beneath her powdered cheeks. That famously crooked finger now adorned with bigger rings, but she never allowed herself to age in spirit. She continued to dress as a goddess, play the part of a coquette, and command the attention of men half her age. But sometimes, only sometimes, you see a flicker of sadness in her eyes. A longing, maybe, not just for lost youth, but for the version of herself who could once love freely, before all the titles, before all the danger. Because here's the secret nobody talks about. Elizabeth's court was never just about love or loneliness. It was survival. Every kiss not given, every night spent alone, was a shield. Historians still argue whether she was ever truly tempted, whether any one man broke through that glittering armor she wore like a second skin. Some say Dudley did. Others claim Essex came close. A few whisper of nameless guards or musicians glimpsed in night shadows. But in the record books, the Queen stays untouched, and in the tilt yard below her, the knights continue to joust. One breaks a lance. The crowd cheers. She applauds, ever the glittering virgin deity. But you know better now. This wasn't chastity. It was choreography. And you lucky you're here to see it unfold. You return to court after a season, away tired perhaps, of the endless banquets and the stench of rosewater masking sweat. But you're hardly back before you hear it. The whispers, they come from behind arras tapestries, drift down the long gallery, echo in the privy chamber. One of the foreign ambassadors has been seen leaving the Queen's presence, flushed, dishevelled, and just a bit too smug. Not unusual on its own. But then the Spanish envoy mentions it in a letter. She entertains his Grace of Anjou as if he were a prince and a paramour both. That word paramour shocks you. It's not diplomatic. Another ambassador, this time from Venice, writes home that he heard Elizabeth laughing most sweetly behind a curtain with a man known to be, let's say, particularly well sculpted beneath his doublet. His phrasing, "Not mine." You lean into the scandal, of course. Who wouldn't? Everyone does. Because behind the splendor, these rumors are currency, and more importantly, they chip away at the myth. The Virgin Queen, maybe not so untouchable after all. Let's talk about these foreign reports. The French were always the most theatrical. They called Elizabeth la Reine, amoureuse, the Queen in love. One diplomat described her as fickle and flirtatious, yet commanding as a lion. Another, less poetically, claimed he heard certain sounds late at night in the palace, and that they were not caused by prayer. Now, none of this is hard evidence. It's hearsay envoys trying to one-up each other, curry favor, or cast suspicion. But taken together, they paint a picture far richer and more human than official portraits allow. One night, in a warm corner of the court's wine cellar, you overhear two aging courtiers swapping tales. One claims the Queen once dismissed her entire retinue to dine privately with a visiting noble from the Polish court. The other insists she made a joke in Latin about the man's legs, a joke only scholars would get, but one that set off snickers all through the Privy Council the next day. The implication that Elizabeth flirted in 10 languages and preferred her wine with a sight of danger. And here's a juicy one, a Portuguese ambassador reportedly offered his own cousin to Elizabeth as a consort, charming, courtly, and discreet. She invited him to dance, yes, but later, when asked if she'd marry him, she quipped, "I have already a husband, the kingdom." The cousin left heartbroken, but not empty-handed. He was sent home with a gold medallion and a pair of the Queen's gloves, her own gloves, scented and stitched. It was both a peace offering and a taunt, because Elizabeth was a master of this game. She used these foreign interactions to stir envy at home and fear abroad. If Spain thought she might marry France, they backed off. If France feared she'd turn to Sweden, they sweetened their deal. Every suitor, every subtle hand touch across a map's table was part of the great performance. Yet some rumors stray beyond politics. You stumble on one tucked deep in the archives of a minor Saxon envoyer, letter marked confidential, written in shaky hand. It says, "The Queen's shadow lingers long past her footsteps. Her laughter echoes in chambers I thought empty. I believe she visits rooms without guards, perhaps even his chamber. Who he is, the letter doesn't say. Perhaps Dudley, perhaps someone we never knew." Of course, historians still argue whether any of this gossip has a kernel of truth. Maybe Elizabeth was just brilliant at playing expectations against each other. Maybe her court was a place of strictly enforced decorum, ornamented with courtly love. But all make-believe. But then there's the chambermaid who swore under oath that she found the Queen's slippers in the rooms of a courtier. There's the Spanish letter that says her bedding had to be changed twice in one night. There's even a strange tale from an Irish envoy who claimed Elizabeth wore only a fine shift when receiving him in her privy garden. That could be theatrical flaw, something else. You think back to one autumn evening, the Queen seated under a crimson canopy in the garden. A light breeze stirs her veil. She laughs softly at something a courtier says his name lost to time, and you see her rest a hand on his arm, brief but unmistakable. You see, there's no proof, no signed confession, no portrait with a lover's initials hidden in the folds of her dress, but there is ... feeling, energy, presence, and the question that clings like perfume long after she leaves the room. Could she have remained untouched? Or did she simply learn to hide her touch so well, so cleverly, that history had no choice but to believe the myth? Because if Elizabeth did anything better than anyone, it was curate herself. She wasn't just a queen, she was a symbol, and maybe the most powerful lie she ever told was the one no one dared challenge. You're in the Queen's gallery now, surrounded by stiff oil portraits and suspiciously perfect pearls, and the air smells of varnish, dust, and something slightly acidic like ambition baked into the paint. Elizabeth I gazes out from canvas after canvas, always radiant, always ageless, always alone. But you notice something odd. Look closer. No shadows behind her. No husband, no children, no softness. Just splendor. Embroidered gowns like armored tapestries. Faces idealized beyond reason. Symbols in every inch, roses, swords, moons. Even the pearls, supposedly symbols of purity, hang in numbers too perfect to be real. You're standing before the Darnley portrait, now one of her most famous. She's 33 in it, but you'd think she were carved from marble. Her dress is stiff with jewels. Her hand rests on a globe. That's not just a painting, it's propaganda. And that's the point. This is not Elizabeth, the woman. This is Elizabeth, the invention. A walking emblem of a kingdom too fragile to allow vulnerability. She had no choice but to become a myth, and to keep the myth alive. She had to control her image ruthlessly at one point. She even issued a royal proclamation. No portrait of her could be sold or distributed unless personally approved. Her face became as tightly regulated as her court. Artists were ordered to copy approved face patterns, ensuring she appeared eternally youthful even in her 60s. Crow's feet, forbidden, sagging jowls. Never happened. Reality. Inconvenient. But here's where things get weird. Some of those approved portraits contain ... inconsistencies. Subtle ones. In one, her hand rests unnaturally against her hip, fingers curled in a way no human could replicate. In another, a fold of fabric frames her midsection. Oddly, some say it was to obscure a slight belly. One historian jokingly called it the maybe bump. Was it just sloppy brushwork, or was something being hidden? There's also the curious detail that Elizabeth never sat for a formal portrait after the age of 40. All later depictions are based on earlier images or court-approved sketches. So, historians still argue whether the later images represent her as she was or as she wanted to be remembered. And then there's the rainbow portrait. It's one of the strangest. Painted when she was around 60, it shows her with a snake embroidered on her sleeve, eyes and ears sewn into her gown, and her youthful face glowing like a cherub. In her hand, she holds a rainbow with the Latin phrase, nen, sin sol. Iris, no rainbow without the sun. Translation, I am the sun. I make the rainbow, pretty modest, right? But here's the kicker. In that portrait, Elizabeth's gown is open at the neck, revealing pale, unlined skin. Her hair flows like she's 20. She looks ... ethereal ... almost otherworldly, and right over her heart. A curious brooch, a moon-shaped jewel flanked by 2 small rubies. Some say it's a symbol of Artemis, the virgin goddess of the hunt. But others, they whisper it might be a secret code moon for chastity, rubies for blood. A subtle acknowledgement of something lost. It's in these details that you feel Elizabeth's contradiction most keenly. The woman who ruled alone, who wore armor and styled herself as a warrior queen, was also a woman whose image depended on perfection. She was scrutinized endlessly by suitors, enemies, and even her own people. Her virginity was a political weapon, a divine shield, and a prison cell all at once. And yet, she knew how to manipulate it. Take the allegories, every painting loaded with them. Pearls for purity, dogs for loyalty, ermines for chastity. Sometimes she's painted holding a sieve, like the Roman Vestal Tucha, who proved her virtue by carrying water in a leaky container without spilling a drop. Yes, subtle, not obvious at all, but just once only, once you see something else. In a small, rarely displayed miniature, her eyes seem to shift. The smile is softer, almost wistful. Not the commanding stare of Gloriana, but a gaze that belongs to someone real. Someone weary. Maybe someone who remembers ... things. That miniature, some say, was never meant to be public. It was found in a noblewoman's private effects 2 centuries later. The identity of the artist unknown. And this opens the door to another theory, one that art historians whisper only after a glass or 2 of port. That Elizabeth didn't just approve her own image, she sometimes corrected it. That perhaps she oversaw edits, cropped out hints, asked for folds to be adjusted, had hands painted smaller, cheeks rounder. One court painter reportedly worked under lock and key for weeks after she disliked a sketch. The next version, a masterpiece, and the original, burned because to be immortal, she had to be untouchable, and untouchable meant one thing: the Virgin Queen. So you step back from the canvas now. You let the oil and myth and candlelight swirl in your mind. You wonder how many truths were brushed over, how many glances went unrecorded, how many freckles were deemed unregal and removed. Elizabeth gave us symbols, but not answers. Still, you wonder, could the brushstrokes have betrayed her? Could some flick of crimson or shadow of ivory have preserved, accidentally, the woman behind the crown? Because in a world where women's reputations were etched in glass, Elizabeth found a way to paint herself in gold. You're walking now not through halls of paintings, but through silence, into the deepest corners of the past, where whispers don't echo but settle like dust, into the great unwritten void of Elizabeth's final years. She lives to be nearly 70, an ancient age by Tudor standards, and the last decade of her life. Not golden, not radiant, but cold, complicated, and lonely. You arrive at Richmond Palace, early 1603. The court is still. The Queen, once the heartbeat of England, is fading. Gone are the shimmering gowns, the elaborate wigs, the thrones draped in symbolism. She refuses her doctors, won't eat, won't sleep, won't lie down. She stands for hours, silent, as if terrified that if she sits, she'll never rise again. You watch her now, shrinking into shadow, the once sparkling wit dulled, the flames sputtering, and yet still she refuses to name a successor, even with death at her door. Historians still argue whether this was stubbornness, strategy, or fear. After all, a named heir means you're already being replaced, but some say she waited so long because she didn't trust the future. She'd spent a lifetime making herself indispensable, letting go that wasn't in the script. But beneath the politics lies a deeper ache. Her closest companions are gone. Robert Dudley died in 1588. Essex, the reckless favourite, executed in 1601. Catherine Howard, her cousin, had been beheaded decades earlier. Her beloved ladies in waiting either retired or passed away. What remains? A sea of courtiers waiting for her to die, and Elizabeth brilliant, proud, brilliant. Elizabeth knows it. She keeps one person near, the Countess of Nottingham, an old friend from childhood. And it's here that legend takes its strangest turn. Are you ready? The story goes that just before his execution, the Earl of Essex sent Elizabeth a ring, his final plea for mercy. A gold band with a ruby stone, a promise, a call back to trust. But the ring never reached her. The Countess, some say, kept it hidden. And when, years later, the Countess confessed the betrayal on her deathbed, Elizabeth flew into a fury so deep she screamed, "God may forgive you, but I never shall." Fiction? Perhaps. But it stuck. Because even if the ring never existed, the heartbreak did. It wasn't just political. Essex wasn't just a favourite. He was something else. A reminder of vitality. A link to Dudley. Maybe even a substitute for the love she could never claim in daylight. In her last weeks, Elizabeth grows nearly mute. She communicates with gestures, a flick of the wrist, a glance. Her body wastes away. She lies on cushions on the floor, refusing to be moved, and then quietly, between the hours of 2 and 3 in the morning, she stops breathing. On March 24, 1603, the sun sets on Gloriana. No fanfare, no chorus, just silence. Now here's what's strange. Her body was embalmed quickly, suspiciously quickly. No autopsy, no announcement of natural causes. Within a day or two, she was sealed in a lead coffin and sent to Whitehall. Historians still argue whether this was standard protocol or something else. One theory, they were hiding signs, bruising, bloating, or even pregnancy-related changes. Okay, deep breath. It's a fringe theory, but it exists. One pamphlet from the early 1600s hints darkly that Elizabeth had borne consequence in life, and that it was hidden by the pious art of death. What that means, no one knows. But some interpret it as a veiled suggestion she might have once been with child. Still plenty of others scoff. She was elderly, frail, Embalming needed to happen fast in those days to prevent scandal and decomposition, and the idea of a 70-year-old queen having a long hidden childbirth, frankly, absurd. But the rumors didn't stop with her death. They only grew louder. A few years after James I took the throne, strange pamphlets began circulating. Some claimed Elizabeth had secretly married. Others claimed Dudley fathered a child, and that child had been smuggled out and raised as a nobleman. One man even stepped forward, claiming to be that son. William Hughes, son of the Virgin Queen, he called himself. Naturally, he was imprisoned immediately. Still, you pause, because it says something, doesn't it? That the very idea of Elizabeth as a mother hidden secret, betrayed, was too compelling to die with her. Her funeral was lavish. A white draped coffin, pulled by horses in mourning black. Thousands lined the streets. They called her our glorious Virgin Queen. And above her grave in Westminster Abbey, a Latin inscription, Hegenacini Paribus, a queen without equal, but not without mystery, because even now, as you stand by her tomb, you feel it, that flicker of doubt. Did she die a virgin? Or did she die a woman who had long ago slipped behind the veil of her own legend? You peer into the gloom through centuries of dust and pageantry. Through the sermons and speeches and statues, you listen, you wait. But she tells you nothing, not with words, just the ghost of a smile carved in marble. You're still standing in Westminster Abbey, but your mind is elsewhere, drifting backward, not to Elizabeth herself, but to what came next. Because the end of a reign doesn't mean the end of a legend. If anything, this is when it really begins. James VI of Scotland becomes James I of England with barely a ripple of resistance. A smooth transition. Uncharacteristically smooth, in fact. Some historians still argue whether there had been secret backroom agreements, covert correspondences between Elizabeth's advisors and the Scottish courtwell before her death. But one thing is certain. James wastes no time in reshaping the narrative. He's got a kingdom to unite, a legacy to assert, and Elizabeth, well, she becomes something else entirely. A symbol. Gone is the sharp-tongued woman who dodged Parliament and terrified bishops. In her place, a polished marble saint, the Virgin Queen, mother of her people, goddess of an age. You glance at the portraits, those late-life images of Elizabeth in white and gold, pearls cascading down her bodice like a frozen waterfall, her expression unreadable. These weren't snapshots of who she was in her final days. They were propaganda, crafted to outlive her. Even the Armada portrait, with the defeated Spanish fleet under her feet, was less about historical accuracy than about divine power. She becomes timeless, bloodless, perfect, which is, ironically, the perfect cover, because you know what happens next. The theories take root, and not just the usual court gossip. No, you get whole conspiracy movements, stretching across centuries. There's a story that emerges in the 1600s, tucked into obscure pamphlets and whispered among anti-monarchists, that Elizabeth was not just not a virgin, she wasn't even a woman. Yep, the Bisley Boy legend, you've probably heard it. That as a child visiting the Gloucestershire village of Bisley, young Elizabeth died suddenly of a fever, and in a panic. Her minders replaced her with a local red-haired boy of similar age. Because what's more dangerous than delivering news of a royal heir's death to Henry VIII? It's absurd, of course, and yet people wanted to believe it. The theory lived on because it tickled something deep and primal, the fear that history, as written, is a beautiful lie. Fringe theorists point to her reluctance to marry, her famously high collars and heavy makeup, her deep voice, her supposed dislike of doctors examining her. But mainstream historians, eye-twitching, note that this is pure fiction born of misogyny, misunderstanding, and a touch too much mead. Elizabeth's contemporaries describe her as vivacious, intelligent, elegant, well within the gender norms of her day. There's also her personal tailors, ladies-in-waiting, physicians, and lifetime of court scrutiny, none of whom ever spilled the secret, which, let's face it, would be the scoop of the century. Still, the legend sticks around like mold on cheese. Why? Because it offers something her actual life didn't. Certainty. A tidy answer to an untidy life. Same with the virginity question. If she wasn't really the Virgin Queen, then what was she? That's when you start hearing from the people who claim to be her descendants. Enter stage left. Arthur Dudley. According to reports from the Spanish court in the 1580s, a man by that name arrived claiming to be the secret son of Elizabeth I and Robert Dudley. According to him, he was raised in Kent by a guardian who confessed the truth on his deathbed. The Spanish, delighted by English scandal, interrogated him thoroughly. Some of the details lined up a little too well. He spoke fluent court English, knew the rhythms of royal life. He wasn't a peasant with delusions of grandeur. He was something else, and then he vanishes from the records. Some say he died in a Spanish prison. Others say he was silenced. Historians still argue whether he was a clever impostor or proof that the greatest secret of Elizabeth's reign was hidden in plain sight. And of course, over the centuries, dozens more descendants would claim Elizabethan blood. A few American families quietly whispered they had Dudley-Avon's blood in their lineages, citing names like Artemisia or Bess, cropping up in odd spots in the 1600s. Fantasy, likely, but again there's that hunger, that need to rewrite the past, because the official story, while glorious, leaves a hollow echo. So let's talk real legacies. You wander through the palaces near Greenwich, Richmond, Windsor, echoing off the stone, and everywhere you turn, there she is, in the symbolism, the stained glass, the poems, the memory of a queen who ruled alone, no husband, no children, no bloodline. Her dynasty ends with her, and yet she shapes England for generations. The Church of England survives. The Spanish never conquer. The seeds of empire are sown. The Renaissance reaches its height. Shakespeare writes his tragedies under her watchful eye, and then there's used wondering, did she sacrifice too much? Was her refusal to marry an act of feminist resistance centuries ahead of its time? Or was it simply the only way she could maintain power in a man's world? Historians still argue whether Elizabeth truly chose the path of the Virgin Queen, or whether she walked it because every other road was blocked. But in your dreams, she isn't marble. She's in the garden again, laughing with a boy named Robin. Or in the chamber, gazing into a mirror she no longer fears. Or on horseback, galloping through a storm hair-soaked, heart alive, not a saint, not a virgin, not a ghost, just a woman, blazing her own impossible trail across history. You stand now in the shadow of her tomb. The echoing silence of Westminster Abbey wraps around you, thick with dust and judgment. Above you, in alabaster repose, lies Queen Elizabeth I, immaculate, inscrutable, and disturbingly quiet for someone who once could talk circles around a room full of bishops and generals. But here's the kicker. She's not alone. Directly beneath her coffin lies her half-sister. Mary I, yes, Bloody Mary. They share the same grave stacked like volumes in a library. Queens in uneasy slumber, a Catholic and a Protestant, a wife and a virgin, fire and ice. History's most awkward slumber party. You probably wouldn't survive that arrangement. The tomb inscription, a diplomatic band-aid. It reads, "Partners in throne and grave, here rest to royal sisters, Elizabeth and Mary, in hope of one resurrection." Which is a nice thought, if you forget how they spent years trying to erase each other from the crown and consciousness. But that's the beauty of death, isn't it? The slate gets wiped. A good tomb is the final rewrite. You run your hand along the cool edge of the stone, and your fingers brush against something you can't see, something intangible, legacy, mystery, a woman deliberately draped in contradictions, because by now you've seen what Elizabeth left behind wasn't just politics or poetry. It was something far stickier, an image, the Virgin Queen, and whether it was true or not hardly matters, because it worked. It was a masterclass in PR centuries before PR existed. Her portraits became iconography. Her speeches were carefully calibrated. Her wardrobe codified symbolism. Pearls equals purity. Red equals legitimacy. Eyes and ears embroidered onto her gowns equals omniscience. She wasn't just dressing for court, she was dressing for eternity, and it worked too well. So well that the truth of who she was got steamrolled by the myth of what she represented. But if you listen closely, closer than the sermons, louder than the choirs, you might still catch her real voice. That whip-smart, occasionally petty, endlessly strategic woman beneath the white paint and powdered wigs. She wasn't perfect. She was infuriating. She spent fortunes on dresses while famine swept the countryside. She strung along foreign suitors. For decades, promising much, delivering little. She flirted with tyranny when Parliament dared push too hard. She imprisoned her cousin, Mary Stuart, and then after months of tortured hesitation, signed her death warrant anyway. And yet she was necessary, not just for England's stability, but for its self-perception, for its idea of itself as more than just a soggy island chained to European politics. Under Elizabeth, England found its swagger, its myth of destiny, and that myth required a heroine, a lone woman standing against the tide. Never mind the real Elizabeth may have cried herself to sleep that she hated mirrors, that she walked through her palaces wrapped in scarves and still feeling cold. Historians still argue whether her decline in her final years was due to grief, illness, depression, or simply the toll of living that myth for too long. She became a prisoner of her own legend. The Virgin Queen couldn't afford to age, to mourn, to stumble. She had to be marble even while she was flesh. And when she finally died quietly, in a pile of cushions on the floor of Richmond Palace, there was no grand speech, no Shakespearean farewell. She simply slipped away, refused the priest, refused the fuss. A royal physician reportedly asked her if she wanted anything. No, she whispered, "I see all things." You wonder if that's what she meant. Not the room, not the courtiers waiting at the door, not even her ancestors peering down from the tapestries, but everything, the full sweep of what she had built and what it would cost to maintain. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. She wasn't just the Virgin Queen, she was the sacrificial lamb. Her body, her personal life, her right to love bartered for political survival, and when her body was gone, the image remained, stronger than ever. Today, her name is on statues, ships, institutions. There's a whole era stamped with her brand. A cigarette company, a cruise line, 1,000 bad historical dramas. But most of all, there's that stubborn question. Did she die a virgin? And you realize maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe it's never been about sex, or abstinence, or purity. Maybe it's about control. She took a world that told her she was nothing without a man and proved them all wrong. She built an empire, while dodging assassins, navigating religious war, and outwitting foreign monarchs, all while aging in a fishbowl. She left no heir, but she didn't need to, because you're here, still asking, still wondering, still standing in a dusty tomb trying to make sense of the most enduring paradox in royal history. You can almost hear her laugh, a low, throaty chuckle echoing off the stone. Not quite mockery, not quite mirth, just the sound of a woman who played the greatest long game of all time and won. The light is dim now, flickering low like the last embers in a hearth. You stand at the end of a hall that feels not quite part of any world a whisper between centuries, where the past hums beneath your feet like a cello's last note. You've walked with Elizabeth for hours, tracing every lace thread of her legend, every splinter of her myth, and now you're left with the one thing she feared most, silence. After her death in 1603, England was plunged into the grief of losing a figure who had somehow become both monarch and mirror. No husband, no child, no successor of her blood. Her cousin James, the Sixth of Scotland, took the crown, becoming James I of England. The Tudor line died with Elizabeth. The Virgin Queen had left no seed, only a story. But oh, what a story. Mourning masks were fashioned with her likeness. Crowds lined the funeral route, watching in stiff sorrow as the great golden effigy was paraded through London. 1,000 words were written, 1,000 more were hushed, and yet one word remained louder than the rest. Virgin. The image clung to her like perfume, soaked into silk, pure, untouchable, above reproach, except, of course, for the endless speculation rumors she laughed off in life, and that grew louder in death. You know the ones. Whispers of illegitimate children, secret marriages, forbidden dalliances in shadowed palace gardens. A fringe theory even claims she gave birth in secret, and that Francis that Bacon was her love child. Or was it Shakespeare, or Essex? Historians still argue whether these tales reflect desperation to connect genius to royalty, or an unrelenting refusal to believe that a woman could rule without desire, or at least without satisfying it. But what do these debates really say? Not much about her. A lot about us, because deep down we are still trying to unravel the mystery that she made, the centerpiece of her reign. How can a woman hold immense power in a man's world and still survive? And that's the great sleight of hand, isn't it? The moment you start asking if she died a virgin, you're already playing by her rules. She set the bait. She blurred the lines between truth and theatre, knowing full well that curiosity would outlive her body. Every coy smile in a portrait, every ambiguous line in a letter, every flirtation and refusal carefully planted clues in a maze you were never meant to solve, because she understood that the best legacy isn't a crown or a castle, it's unresolved fascination. Even today, Elizabeth refuses to sit still. You see her in modern women who must constantly perform competence while dodging the spotlight of gendered scrutiny. In every powerful figure second-guessed for not being maternal enough, soft enough, submissive enough. In every tabloid still obsessed with who slept with whom, as if that ever explained anything real. And as you step into the cooling hush of the Abbey, you realize something else. Elizabeth didn't just rule an empire, she outlived it, not in years, not in flesh, but in imagination. You can't watch a coronation today without her ghost brushing past the velvet. You can't study political imagecraft without her smirking behind the scenes. You can't talk about women in power without her name rising like steam from a centuries-old teacup. So, did Queen Elizabeth I die a virgin? Maybe, maybe not. But she died something rarer, untouchable, in all senses of the word. And maybe that was never a lie at all, but a spell, cast carefully, recast constantly. A bit of performance, a bit of myth, and just enough truth to hold you hostage. Because here you are, all these centuries later, still spellbound, still leaning in, still not ready to let her go. And now, as the echo of Elizabeth's world fades into the hush of your room, you let your body loosen, your breath soften. The hallways of Hampton Court have emptied. The perfumed air of her bedchamber grows still. The courtiers chatter, the rustle of ruffs and velvet, the clink of pearls, it all dims. Like the final candles blown out one by one in a long-forgotten palace. You picture her now not as a queen, but as a figure leaning back into the shadows, barefaced, alone, a woman, who mastered the game until the game became her, who walked the knife's edge between love and legacy, refusing to fall, who stitched silence into spectacle. Let her rest now, and let yourself rest. To dot the questions don't need answers tonight. They can hover gently in the corners of your mind, like dust caught in stained glass morning light. Maybe that's what she wanted all along, not certainty, but curiosity, not finality, but wonder. So wherever you are, whatever city, whatever time, let your eyes grow heavier now. Let the pageantry fade, the music stop, let the fan hum steady in the dark. You've walked through centuries tonight. You've knelt beside thrones, listened through keyholes, wandered graveyards thick with secrets, and now the world outside this story returns. But it's softer somehow, because once you've stood at the feet of a myth, the ordinary can never quite look the same. Sleep well, and remember she never needed to be touched to leave a mark.